experience.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA.
Ocala.
All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Nice looking Wednesday morning. And let's talk about Benghazi. The story about Sergeant Bergdahl these last couple of days is being pointed out by some people as a distraction, an intentional distraction. I don't know. I mean, I don't ever know when they are and when they aren't. Everything is made into a political story, but the story about the attack in Benghazi, what was it, 2012, September 11th, 2012, is something we've had Congressman Richard Nugent on to talk about why he feels like we need to reinvestigate that and go over it again. And of course, many people, and this is a very partisanly divided, is that a word, partisanly? It's divided down the center pretty much. The Democrats don't want another investigation. The Republicans do. My feeling was simple, that what would you, I mean, if the second investigation revealed the same thing, then so be it. But what if there is something we didn't know? What if this, what's missing here? And so we have Terry Tibbetts in the studio. Terry's been with us before, and he was watching the news. I'm going to let him do his own talking, but he was watching the news and he noticed some references to the Vietnam Battle of Ong Than. Do I say that right?
Well, I didn't notice that being discussed on the news, but I put together... Oh,
but you noticed
I was watching the hearing where the Air Force General was talking about his role in the lead up to the Benghazi disaster.
Okay, and you see a similarity.
I began to make parallels, yes.
Okay, so let me just, you, Terry, are retired, right, from the Air Force? No.
No, I never served in the military.
Okay. But you are in part going to talk about retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Lovell.
He was the person that was on the hearing.
All right. Well, good morning, Terry. How are you? How are you doing? Yeah, this isn't as complicated as it really sounds. To me, it doesn't. It's not complicated. To me, it sounds like there was reason to believe there was going to be an attack. And those who felt like they were going to be the target of that attack were asking for help, and nobody came to help them.
Nobody came to help. Let me lead off by saying, and this really is kind of what we're talking about here. George Santayana, a philosopher of years ago, said, "Those who do not listen to the lessons of history are bound to repeat it." And I see very strong possibilities that we may be repeating a disaster here with Benghazi compared to the Battle of Ong Than in Vietnam in 1967, which we've discussed a number of times,
right.
Which I wrote a book about, which was intended to be a biography of a West Point football star who turned down the military and the New York Giants and Vince Lombardi to stay in the service, volunteered for Vietnam, volunteered to try to save some guys, and go to the sound of the guns, which is one of the big issues that we're going to talk about today.
Go to the sound of the guns.
Go to the sound of the guns, and he was the only person who went to the sound of the guns. He was killed. And
name him, please.
As a result of all of this,
Terry, what was his name again?
Don Hollader.
Right.
Excuse me. Yes. Because of this disaster, a number of things that we've gone into before, we don't have the time to go into today, but the top-level military tried to manufacture heroism where it didn't belong and ignored heroism and masked it over and covered it up, basically, is what happened. And I think we may be heading down that road again. There are two parallels in this Benghazi situation that parallel exactly with the Battle of Ong Than. Now, as I say, I never served in the military. My hearing kept me out. But I've gotten to know a lot of people who were there in that battle in Vietnam, the Battle of Ong Than, which nobody's ever heard of. People are listening now and saying, what the heck was that? That was the turning point in the Vietnam War, in which the cover-up caused the press to distrust the military from that point on and pass that distrust on to the American public. And no one knows about that, unfortunately.
So do you fear that same thing is happening?
I see that. I fear that that's happening again. There are two parallels, as I say. One is, and we've talked about.
Does the distrust of the American press include the distrust of the American politician?
I really don't know. I'm not an expert on that. I am an expert on the Battle of Ong Thang. Mike Mahler, who was the 1st Division adjutant in Vietnam at that time, he wrote the first book about the situation, which really mushroomed from that point on. And Mike said that I have put together the defining book about the Battle of Ong Thang. So I know about the Battle of Ong Thang, and I know all the mistakes that everybody made.
Everything I know is from you, by the way, about that battle, because I never heard of it either.
Yeah. So there are two things, two parallels. One is go to the sound of the guns, which I've mentioned about Don Hollander.
Right.
Don and his boss were in a helicopter. They never figured that anything was going to happen out of the ordinary that particular day. They had been concerned about another battalion. But when they got there, they realized, this is a major problem. So they went up, the two of them went up overhead. Don and his commanding officer, Colonel George Newman, who I've become very friendly with over the years, and they realized there was a real problem. Weapons going off like crazy, and then they finally began to figure out what was happening, and Don said to his boss, he said, I'm the only person that can go to their aid, can go to the sound of the guns. And Clark Welch, I'm going to skip ahead to the ceremony in which Don Hollander's Distinguished Service Cross, which was awarded 40 years after the fact, due to my role in some part, at Arlington National Cemetery. I was there. Clark Welch made, I'm going to come back to him a little bit later on, made the comments, and he said it wasn't the Army, it wasn't the Air Force, it wasn't artillery, it was one man who came to our rescue and came to the sound of the guns, Don Hollander. Now, and the military people in the Benghazi situation, General Lovell, who we've mentioned briefly, who was interviewed in a House hearing a couple of months ago, and this is what made me go on all of this. I was watching that, and he mentioned going to the sound of the guns, and those Air Force men at that station were concerned about going to their comrades' rescue.
Right. These are the two guys that got killed you're talking about, right?
Well, yes, the two Navy SEALs did go. They were the only two.
The only two?
Who went to the sound of the gun. They weren't even on duty there. They were security men at a secure annex, a safe distance removed, but they found out what was going on.
And before their lives were taken, they took 60.
They did.
Right? Wasn't it 60?
I don't know exactly, but they went to the sound of the guns and they did their best, and they kept calling in for assistance, and they were told 3 times to stand down. Not only were there was no aid going to be sent, they were told to stand down, get out of the picture. They disobeyed orders, and they paid the ultimate sacrifice. So we saw this in Benghazi.
Wow.
That no one went to the sound of the guns.
Okay, so we didn't learn, and then it's probably happened even before the Vietnam War, and we're seeing it right now. See the one thing about the Benghazi event though is that we sort of kind of, if we didn't know, the reports say we knew, but even if you didn't know, you might suspect something is going to happen on September 11th. That was that date.
One would figure that.
Yeah.
One would figure that.
Right.
I read this news report, and it's very brief. On September 11th, this is about going to the sound of the guns. They were ensconced in, this is the two Navy SEALs who didn't have anything to do with it, suppose. They were ensconced in the safety of an annex location in another part of the city when they got word that the main consulate building was under fire, and the diplomats there, with an armed force of only 9 people, were overwhelmed by the deteriorating situation. Doherty and Woods, along with other security personnel, left the secure annex and made their way to the chaotic scene, rounding up the consulate staff who were under attack and guiding them back to the second safe building. Now, if that doesn't sound what a trained military man is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that's just what Don Hollider's plan was, to go to the sound of the guns, to rescue the wounded, to rally the able-bodied, and to get people out of there. That's what he was on the road to do.
He died in the doing the same thing, yeah.
Never got there. And no one else sent any reinforcements to help out the situation. Like Clark said at the gravesite, he said it wasn't the Air Force. The Air Force didn't send in any strikes. It was not the Army. They didn't send in that Spear Battalion. They told them, don't go. The recon.
Now, now the implication with Benghazi is that there were orders from higher up. I don't know how high it goes, but to not show up, to not go there. Were similar orders or similar rumors of orders at the Battle of Ong Thang?
Those 2 Navy SEALs were told not to.
In Benghazi.
In Benghazi.
But I mean, in Ong Thang, was there something similar there?
They just didn't send in. No, they didn't send in any reinforcements. The man who was staffing the night defensive position, he could have sent in the other battalion that was on. They were stationed at the night defensive position.
Right.
The commanding officer did not send them in because he was afraid that the Viet Cong would overrun the headquarters if they sent that spare battalion of some 70-something guys in to try to help out their comrades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when you look at history and you say, this is why Congressman Nugent in his discussion with us said that he wants this second, not evaluation, but investigation, because he feels like if we know what went wrong, we might not do it again. And even though we sort of kind of know already what went wrong, but I guess the big question is, were there orders from higher up, from Washington, D.C., saying, leave them alone? I mean, you already kind of hinted at it, not hinted at it, but basically spelled it out.
None of that has been proven. None of that has been explored. None of that. Nobody's been called in to testify. The people who really know, the State Department people, they haven't gone on the record with anything. And those who say, well, we've already covered Benghazi. That's not right. We haven't covered it. We need to leave no stone unturned, because patriots died trying to defending their country. Congressman Jason Tibbetts, he's from Utah. He went to Benghazi, and he said afterwards, I remain skeptical of the lack of military response. He wasn't blaming the military. There wasn't any military response because there were no orders to them to do anything. And then he went on to say, although some forces were positioned, none were directed toward, guess what, the sound of the guns.
Oh my gosh.
Now the argument from those, and we've had this discussion on the air, so I know sort of the other side. And the listeners, if you want to debate, join in on this, you're welcome to. Terry's here to talk to all of us. And so the number here is 622-9622 if you'd like to speak. But the argument has come up before, the debate, I should say. And the other side of this, because I'm on your side, I think I'm on Congressman Nugent's side as well. I think we should look into this again. It looks like some people died, and we need to know some more than we know.
Absolutely.
That's what I think.
Yep.
But those who say we don't need to know anymore say this. They say that the whole attack took only an hour. So there was no time for anybody to get there anyway. You want to respond to that?
Sure. It went on for a heck of a lot longer than an hour. Those guys, Doherty and Woods, were there well into the early morning hours defending that position. I think maybe, and I really don't want to speculate, but it could have been that the higher-ups in charge believed that it was all over, and therefore, looking ahead, well, why do we need to look ahead? Because it's all over and we can't do anything about it. As I say, I really shouldn't speculate, but Doherty and Woods were there well into the morning, still firing away with their rockets and grenades and all of that. There was time to rescue them.
And first and foremost, when Americans are in countries other than the United States, the military should be there to protect them and be on the alert for anything that's coming, even, if they don't feel something's coming, they should be there for the unexpected and help those Americans, because, they've lost their lives, and their families have lost a loving member of their family.
A lot of lives have been lost. A lot of loved ones are grieving still, and they're looking for answers still.
Yeah, and the U.S. government should give them those answers. They should man up and just say, okay, it was my department, I did wrong. They should, do that, but they're not.
The Washington Post poll that was the news just this morning, or maybe late yesterday, a majority of Americans are in favor of an investigation of Benghazi by a House Select Committee. 51% of those surveyed say they supported the probe into the attacks on September 11, 2001, in which U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 3 other Americans, including the 2 Navy SEALs that you referred to, were killed. And in fact, information on Ambassador Stevens is contrary. One story says he died from smoke inhalation. The other one says he was killed he was castrated. The
assistant died of smoke inhalation. I don't think Ambassador Stevens died of smoke inhalation.
I don't either. I mean, I read the report. It sounds like the photo that I saw of them with his body, that doesn't look like he died of smoke inhalation.
No.
All right, we do have a phone call. Good morning. Thank you for calling. You're on the air. Oh yeah, you'll need your headphones. Yep. Hang on a second.
The other part of this whole scenario is not necessarily the sending of things in, but the cover-up of stating that this was a protest for a documentary or whatever it was, to say that this wasn't an act of terrorism or what have you. And that's another part that I don't think you've discussed, or that has sort of been set aside, of saying that the way the thing was, well, we couldn't have prevented it because it was just a protest over this document, and not that was done by a militant group. So.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that part in, because that is an important part of this story also.
That is.
Thank you, Bob.
That I'm not, I'm not an expert on that, so that's why I haven't touched on that. That's a whole different issue. But the 2 issues that we discussed in quite detail, going to the sound of the guns, and the other issue is a chain of command situation that I hope we can discuss before we get through.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 these are the 2 situations that I know about, because they came up in that Battle of Long Thang, and from what I can see, they came up in Benghazi. The other one is there is it's a written rule that a subordinate officer in the military has the right and the duty, really, to question a superior officer if he or she believes that the order is in error. This happened in the Battle of Long Thang. Clark Welch, who has been behind these microphones before, raised that to his superior officer when the Battle of Long Thang strategy was planned. It was not the strategy that had been discussed earlier in the afternoon with a general and a colonel and the battalion commander, who was a lieutenant colonel. The lieutenant colonel, the battalion commander, changed the plan, said, we're going to sneak up on them the next morning. Clark Welch said he remembers to this day in the meeting thinking to himself, what the heck is that? So he raised his hand and he said, sir, may we reconsider that? He said, not now. May I see you after the meeting, sir? Yes, you may. And he questioned his superior officer about the advisability of that. He said, sir, this is not going to work. That's the way it's going to be. The commanding officer has the final say. But the subordinate officer has the right to question his superior officer. Now, in my book, Clark Welch sent me quite a bit of information on what his perspective was going into that battle. And he said, and it's in the book, and I will never forget, and he says he will never forget it. He said, I had assured my men that they would live to go home. Many of my men were killed. I felt guilty about that for many years. I finally learned to accept that. But I will never ever be able to justify how I was unable to convince my commanding officer that his orders were faulty. He says, I will always live in guilt of that.
That makes you feel bad, because he tried.
Yeah.
What he feels like he could have tried harder.
Yeah. So you can imagine where I am when I saw this same situation. We really don't know whether orders were given by the State Department. That Lovell, the Brigadier General, who's sitting there waiting for orders. He knows there's bad time trouble going on.
Yeah.
He wants to go to the sound of the guns, but he's not hearing any command. There's nothing being issued.
So disobeying
from the
a
State Department.
non-command is really no different than disobeying a command.
Well, and that's it. And I really don't know. I'm not that much of an expert. But not hearing any order, I don't know whether he had the right, or the
Wow.
authority
Wow.
to suggest or recommend something. He hadn't been consulted. He said, could we have gotten there in time to make a difference? I don't know. But we should have tried. Now, somebody in Congress said Lovell was not in the chain of command. He didn't have any say in it.
Right.
Well, why was he in that position then if he wasn't in the chain of command and had no authority? Again, I really don't know.
That's a good
I
question.
I raise these because those who say there shouldn't be an investigation, we've already covered it. We have not. All of that needs to be dug into, and the truth needs to be discovered and ferreted out.
Wow. Especially if you have somebody who was ready to jump and maybe would have made no difference at all, except for the fact that maybe more than 60, two Navy SEALs killed 60 of the attackers.
Yep.
That's pretty amazing.
Yep. So there were people there ready to go, qualified people ready to go, but they were not summoned. Same thing happened in the Battle of Long Thang. There were people ready to go. There were people listening on the radio. Jim Shelton, who's been behind these microphones before, was at division headquarters. They could do nothing. They were removed from the battle by a number of miles, and they listened in horror to these guys getting killed on the radio. And he said, what was I going to say? But they heard, and they couldn't go. It was a frustrating situation. Now here is General Lovell sitting there listening on the radio, and he can't do anything.
Thing.
Yeah, that's the parallel I was going to make. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's a wonderful parallel. And again, if we know what happened, what went wrong, then I don't know. Maybe we'll still make the same mistake. Who knows? The caller though pointed out the attempt to blame the attack on that video, and that is an important element of this too, because it almost seems like the president knew everything that you and I now know. He knew then. That's what it sounds like, and therefore there was really no reason to really believe that there was a video that somehow stirred up the terrorists.
That's my opinion too. I don't think the video had anything to do with it.
We've only got another minute. I want to make sure you don't. I'm going to make sure you say whatever you had in mind to say. I know you had a few things.
I think we've covered the subject. I brought in some notes here to go to, and I was afraid, am I going to be able to look at this and talk at the same time? We've had a good discussion at this, and I think we've hit the major issues here. And I hope that the people who are listening here today are going to think about this, do some research, and start calling some people.
Well, and again, going back to that ABC Washington Post poll, only 42 is almost 50. 42% say there's no need for a further investigation. The poll also found 50% of those polled disapprove of the way then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton handled the aftermath of Benghazi. So, of course, and that's a hard one for her to live down, and it's going to be difficult if she tries to run for the presidency. I wonder, do you think, and this is speculation, do you think that some of these other stories, like Bergdahl, do you think that's an intentional way of distracting us from Benghazi, which is what the news people are saying?
I haven't studied it that much. It's a horrible situation. Again, I really don't know as I want to comment, but Hillary Clinton, the thing that I will always remember, what difference does it make
Everybody
now?
remembers, yeah.
And if anybody thinks and runs that through their mind, is that somebody we should nominate for president or elect for president? I don't know.
What would you have said to her? You got 10 seconds. What difference does it make now? What would you have said in response?
I would have said, tell that to the loved ones.
The loved ones,
Oh, wow.
absolutely.
That's-
Terry, you're an amazing guy. Always fascinating to have you in the studio. The time never is enough. Thank you. Thank you for
You're
coming
welcome.
in today.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, we've got to move forward. We've got Fox News, and we'll be right back. This is The Source, WOCA Ocala.
Fox News Radio. I'm Chris Foster. People at the Pentagon are reviewing a Taliban-released video of Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's handover to U.S. Special Forces after 5 years in captivity.
He's clean-shaven, dressed in white, and appears to be blinking as his eyes adjust to the bright sun. Militants